Hey, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the work session for the City Council for the City of Wildwood for Monday, the 28th of June. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Bullen,
Here.
Councilmember Galani,
Here.
Councilmember Hopper,
Here.
Councilmember Jaxi,
Here.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Here.
Councilmember Ottenberg,
Here.
Councilmember Edens,
Here.
Councilmember Bros,
Here.
Councilmember Garitano,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo,
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Here.
Councilmember Farmer,
Here.
Councilmember Nyan,
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
All right, we're all here in full force. Excellent. So before we get to action items under information, I think we have 12. My count is correct, 12 items. If there's anything under information that any member of the council would like to discuss, or if you have a question about it, now would be the time before we go to action items. So is there anything anyone wants to discuss under information? All right, we'll go to action. And again, as we've done in the past, if there's no objection, I thought it might work well for us to discuss the remaining items before we get to the strategic planning discussion. Kind of save that to the end. Is that okay with everyone if we do that? Sure. Yep.
Can we just make sure that we do hit that up today, no matter what, whether it be after the regular meeting or something?
We're
If we
going
have
to get to it one way or the other,
Okay, great, thanks.
but I think we'll be able to get to it before the meeting. All right. Next, so we're going to put that aside for a moment. Next on the list is the committee chair election, and Councilmember Bartoni, this was on the agenda at the last meeting per your request, but since you were not able to attend that meeting, I asked the council about moving it to this meeting because just out of a courtesy, because you were the one who had asked for it. I think without objection, it might be best if we heard from our city attorney relative to the bottom line, John, on what the decisions or the options are before the council, given what you found.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor. Members of the council, per the request of the council, I did review the procedures for the election of the chairpersons for the various standing committees of the city council. And I want to make two particular notes on that. First, the procedures set forth in Robert's Rules of Order, which is the rules of order adopted by the city council by ordinance and codified, have been provided to you, which in essence provide for nominations and elections. There are two procedures of elections, which I've outlined to the city council. Obviously one is preferred over the other, not only in my estimation as a practical matter, but also by Robert's Rules own statements. One is a preferred method. But those are the procedures that the standing committees should follow, is either one of those two, and each standing committee can elect which procedure they'd like to follow. But I do want to make a particular note about the policy that has been distributed. First, I was not aware of a policy particular to the standing committees prior to our discussion. Or prior to around this time. I had not seen it previously. It's not codified. It's not an ordinance. It was something that was voted on under a miscellaneous item at a regular meeting back in, I think it was 2010. A couple of issues with the passage of that regulation. One is it's not clear exactly what was passed. Second is that it doesn't effectively overrule Robert's Rules of Order, which was adopted by ordinance. Or not necessarily overrule, but supplant or supersede Robert's Rules of Order, which was adopted by ordinance. So I can't recommend following the policies, knowing that there were some significant issues with the validity of its adoption and its effect. So what I am recommending to the city council and the various standing committees is to follow the procedures of Robert's Rules of Order, which have been adopted in the city code and have been provided to you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
So John, just a procedural question. If the council decides to do that, given that we have, excuse me, an ordinance that conflicts with the policy, would the appropriate course be for the council to rescind the policy? Or is it your position that the policy was never validly adopted to begin with and therefore does not need rescission?
If it would be much cleaner if the council were to rescind the policy that was errantly adopted.
Keyword errantly. Okay. Councilor Bartoni.
So the reason I brought this up was to try to make this clear.
Is your mic on?
Yeah, it is. I'm just not close enough to it. So what I was hoping was just to make this clear, and I don't want this to become turn a mountain into a molehill or a molehill into a mountain here either. But if I'm correct, John, any committee can use either of these two processes to elect a chair.
Correct.
Okay. So
Either
that's-
two being under Robert's rules.
Correct. These two that are under Robert's rules. You get, okay. And that's what I was kind of hoping would not happen, because then there can be some, I guess, discussion on that and maybe not. But so let's just say we're in a committee meeting right now and we're going to elect a chair right now. Who decides which way we're going to vote?
The body itself would.
So we would vote on, so we, first thing the committee would have to do is let's vote on how we're going to vote.
Correct.
And then from there, I guess that dictates on how you do the nominations, or, well, I guess not necessarily that, but just on how you vote on the nominations.
Yeah, I will say there's actually two ways of doing it. One is the person who is the presiding officer for that particular meeting can proceed in whatever manner they want. If someone objects and says, no, I'd like to have a vote on which to follow, that's fine. Then you would have to have a vote. But if the presiding officer of that meeting, the chair of that meeting, proceeds in one method without objection, that's acceptable.
Okay, and I guess what was a little bit confusing is, and I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but if I remember correctly, we had both of these options in front of us. We did not.
No, we had one policy that was.
Councilmember McCutcheon.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's all right.
Sorry, there.
That's all right.
He looked at me, so I answered.
That's okay.
We had the policy
Go
that
ahead.
was not like a policy
Right, we had a policy that was passed in 2010.
that, if that was the option we were looking at, that was probably the only option we should not have been looking at.
That was the option that was in the past.
Okay, okay, so, I mean, knowing that we have these two in place, I mean, I guess I'm okay with that, but do we need a motion to rescind the errant policy?
We do.
Okay, I will make that motion.
Is there a
And we
second?
move forward with that.
Second by Councilmember Rambo. Is there any discussion on the motion to rescind the errant policy? Seeing no discussion on the motion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so that motion is passed. Anything further on this item? Councilor Rambo.
Real quickly, is it appropriate for us to decide on preference as a body? I think the Ugochi option leads to leadership inertia, which may or may not be what we want. And the roll call leads to fairness. I'm always down with fairness. I think to register your vote affirmatively for the particular leader. And so even if we leave it to committees, there first has to be a controversial decision as to which method we're going to adopt in that committee, and then make the have the vote. And so it's fraught with tension that doesn't need to be there if we just do a simple roll call vote when the leadership of the committee is up for contention. Is that reasonable to anyone, or okay?
Well, the only thing I would say, and I'm not necessarily expressing, I guess, an opinion one way or the other. I was trying to think through as you were talking options where, or hypotheticals where one or the other could cause a problem. The only thing I would say, just informationally, Robert's rules, which is adopted by our code, has been around for a long time. And one of the things I've learned from presiding at meetings and utilizing it, there are reasons for everything it's got in there. In other words, there's nothing new under the sun, and what's proposed to be tried today has been tried several times, and that's the reason for a rule on it. So I guess I would just be a little wary that a good intentioned idea of picking one or the other without thinking through all the potential things that might have given rise and hypotheticals to the options that that rule provides for could end up causing an issue at some point. I just have a lot of faith, just speaking from someone who's had many issues come up that Robert's Rules has been applicable to. It's very sound, logical, developed over, I don't know if I'd say centuries, but if not that close to it. And so certainly the council can make a decision either way. That's just one thing I wanted to mention.
I would say
Robert's
it works, Robert's Rules works in generally applicable to running all meetings in an orderly fashion. It doesn't necessarily address the specifics of an elected body of any kind. And I think a roll call vote gets you down. This is your choice. And I think that that may be just a clearer and fairer way to do things. So how do I proceed with that? And is it legitimate to ask to vote on one of those two procedures now, make a motion to that effect, or should we just leave it dangling? Because I feel like it's going to cause another problem down the road next time we transition leadership. So I'm asking it.
I'll defer to the city attorney.
Thank you. If the city council were going to provide a specific rule about how the elections at standing committees are going to occur, I believe that would have to be an ordinance amendment or a code amendment. So an appropriate motion at this time would be the preparation of legislation, amending the provisions of the city code regarding standing committees, setting forth a specific election procedure.
So let's wait till it bites us again. I think that sounds a little like a little more effort than I was interested in going through. I thought it was a clean and simple vote. So I'll let it hang.
Councilor Galani.
So I'm just trying to clarify too. So when you say roll call vote, is that if we're voting on person A and B that are running against each other for the chair, are we going to say, call each person's name and then you say person A or person B, and by default, whoever gets the majority wins? Or are we saying that you're going to do a roll call vote and we're voting on person A, and if by default person A doesn't get the majority, then person B automatically wins? Because there's two different processes there to do the same thing. And I think that's what Councilmember Rambo's, we had a conversation about it previously, but it makes it a little bit more the tension there if you're having to vote on the one person and then turn around and re-vote on the other person, regardless of what the outcome was on the first vote, if that makes sense.
Right. So just to be clear, the two types of elections are viva voce and roll call. Viva voce is, by way of example, you've got two nominees. First person who was nominated is voted up or down, aye or nay. If they win, they're elected and you're done. If they do not win, then you go and you vote on the second nominee. And if the second nominee wins, they win and you're done. And no matter how many nominees, you just go in that order based on the order in which they were nominated. For a roll call vote, it is, here's our two, or let's say three nominees. Okay. And you go down the line of each committee member, and each committee member names the name of the person they want elected. And as you go down that line, if you have a majority, whoever's in the majority wins the election. Now, in the situation of like a three nominated candidates, you may not have a majority. And that's a majority of the people voting, not a majority, like more than the other two. So then you would just do it again and keep doing it until you had someone with a majority.
But would you iron it down? So if you had three, and let's say, two tied and the other one didn't, then would you re-vote on those two and the other one's out, or you keep doing on all
According to
three?
Robert's rules, you would vote on all three again.
So there you may go with it. That may be the issue. So I have a question for you, John. Let's say under Councilmember Galani's scenario, the roll call is the roll call approach is used, and there's no one candidate out of 3, 4, or 5, or whatever that gets a majority. Is it the chair's ability, with the permission of the body of that committee, to then go to the other option of electing a chair that Robert's rules has allowed for?
Robert's rules doesn't really address that, but if the body decided to use a different voting method, the body could.
So there you go. That might be the issue, because if you've had that first roll call approach applied and it just ends up in nothing, in essence, then that would give the body flexibility to say, okay, we're going to try a different method, which would be, we're going to take nominees, and whoever's first, we're going to vote on that person, and the del voce or voice voce, whatever approach applies. So that might be why you would want to keep both of those. Anything further?
No, I'm good.
Councilor Garitano.
I think of, there's also the planning and zoning liaison that the council selects and the mayor pro tem. And I believe that process is defined that it is roll call. By that, I mean the one where, if there are two people interested, we go around and state the name. So I'm in favor of that option, because the other option, which is, what is it called? Viva voce. So that one really all depends on whoever gets the first motion.
Yeah.
So it's, well, it's whoever gets to get the motion first, right? So it's kind of, unfair, and that's where I am. But I do like the fact that if for some reason it does not work, then we can go back to doing the roll, the voce, I guess, option.
I'm glad you brought that up. Is it the case, John, that the policy that was just rescinded included not only the errant policy on election of chairs of committees, but also the procedure for election of mayor pro tem and P and Z liaison? I thought it did.
It did, yes.
Okay. So that may be something that the council wants to address separately. I mean, you don't have to do it at this meeting if you want to think about it. You obviously have plenty of, well, presumably you have plenty of time, but that may be something that the council would want to continue to do in the way it has been done in the past. And if that's the case, is it not the situation that an ordinance would need to be drafted to that effect? Or-
Correct.
So you'd have to change the ordinance to do even that. Okay. Councilmember Dodwell.
I'd like to ask that we move this back to admin and public works. And this is an administrative piece of legislation that we'll have to deal with. I think we've gotten everybody's perspective on it. So maybe we can tackle that a little bit more and provide more detailed response back. Not that the city attorney's detail was very good, but we weren't going through the various scenarios that we are tonight. So maybe we just don't do any voting and move it back to admin public works.
Is there any objection by anyone on the council to having this issue discussed by the admin public works committee with a recommendation back to the council within Councilor Garitano 30 days, or do you want longer?
I'm going to assume that we can handle. I'm going to assume we should be able to handle that in one meeting in 30
Okay,
days.
within 30 days. Any objection to that? Okay, so that'll be the will of the body. Moving next to, so that's been referred, moving next, but the council has rescinded the errant policy, which is good. Okay, moving next to Rick Brown, Department of Public Works, the Monarch Protection District Traffic Study. Where's Rick? Okay. Hello, Rick.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Okay, so this is really the formalization of the council's action relative to moving forward with a traffic study. Rick, is there anything, I know you've provided the council with the background relative to what the Lockmuir Group plans to do and the The cost of that, which I think came in less than what we had anticipated. Yeah, a little bit less. Okay. Anything you want to say about that, Rick?
No, Mr. Mayor, just the duration of the study. They say they will get it done within 4 weeks of notice to proceed. So the cost is just under $20,000. Certainly be able to any questions from the city council.
Okay. Any questions, Councilor Ryan?
I just have a question. Has Monarch agreed to allow this company onto the site?
I don't know that they would need to be on the site. Rick, you want to respond to that? Did you hear the question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I did. And I don't believe they would really need to be on the site, quite frankly. They'll be doing a count at Wild Horse and Evanston Road. They're going to use existing count data at 109 and Wild Horse Creek Road. So I think they'll be fine without that if they were to need it.
Okay, I guess the reason I was asking is, and I didn't not see it in one of the specifications. I know at one point it was brought up about turn ratio, the turn coming out of there. And so I would guess that they would have, I don't know, be on the site to do that. So that was why I asked it.
Rick, can you answer that question on the turn ratios? Because she is correct. That was part of the analysis. Is that something they can do without getting on the property?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, they can do that without getting on the property. They do have in their proposal a site plan review. So they'll be looking at the engineering drawings that are provided, assuming they are provided, of the proposed site and evaluating those for that concern.
Okay. Anything further? Councilmember Bertolino.
Yeah, Rick, I heard through a somewhat reliable third source that the Monarch Fire Department has retained its own engineering firm to do a study. Have you heard that?
Mr. Berlino, no, I have not heard that. I don't know that I would have reason to hear that, quite frankly, but I've not heard that.
Okay.
Well, that's exactly what the council had asked them to do that they refused to do. So if that's the case, I would recommend we determine the answer to that and potentially save the city $20,000. And if that's true, then we go right back to what got this all started, which was the request of the city that they provide the traffic study.
Yeah. And again, my source is semi-reliable. I think, but I think
Well,
a direct note from maybe Mr. Cross or yourself to Monarch saying, have you retained engineering services?
Yeah, and
Just to clear it up.
fair enough. And I think we would understand if it comes back different, it comes back different, and we can go back to this. But I don't think there's any immediate urgency to this. So I guess I would suggest we have this postponed until the next council meeting so that Mr. Cross can make inquiry on that. I would have thought that the fire district would have notified the city presumably, but is there any objection to postponing this for 2 weeks and potentially saving the money and seeing if they've done that? Okay. And Mr. Cross, with the proviso that you'll reach out and determine the accuracy of that. Thank you, Councilmember Bertolino. Okay, Watershed Erosion Task Force. So Joe, if you want to speak to this, but Councilor Rambo, did you send, I think I saw an email from you earlier today about this. Is that correct? The Watershed Erosion Task Force item on that?
Yes.
Okay, so as soon as Joe gets done, I'm going to call on you if you don't mind to talk about your point that you made.
Okay. I'll have
All
to
right.
change from secretary role back to administrative.
Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the Department of Planning has prepared for your consideration tonight a report from the Watershed Erosion Task Force. As you are aware, the Watershed Erosion Task Force has been working for over 2 years to understand the problems in the city's 9 watersheds, identify those of critical urgency, and then address them as best as possible. Not surprisingly, a majority of the most critical locations, and critical locations are defined by those threatening public infrastructure, having advanced erosion and untendered erosion, and those threatening private properties with structures or buildings. In that process, the Watershed Erosion Task Force identified a need to potentially do a study in Cox Creek. The idea behind the study was that if we just treat the injury, we'll never be able to address the symptoms, so to speak. And the symptoms are telling us that there is not enough capacity in terms of storage in the watershed to hold the water back during these frequent now high-intensity storm events. With the assistance of the Department of Public Works, the United States Geological Survey in Rolla, Missouri was contacted. The representative for USGS met with the task force at the beginning of this year, January, and over the course of the last 5+ months have produced a proposal. That proposal is the subject of tonight's discussion. The cost of the study over 2 years to the city of Wildwood would be $170,500. Over the course of that 2-year period, what the city will receive is an analysis of the storage capability in the Cox Creek watershed, where we can improve storage in existing detention retention basins and where we might provide additional storage. Secondly, we'll understand the channel stressors, those things that are leading to the problems that threaten public infrastructure and private property investment. Additionally, we'll know the hydraulics associated with the system that is impacting bank stability. Finally, we'll also be able to create a model that'll tell us where problem areas might end up happening in the future if no changes are made to those stressors, or where we might be able to work toward priority to eventually address them before they happen. Meaning, if we need additional storage here, this is where we should look to avoid a problem in the future. And finally, and I think most importantly, the study will allow us to leverage our proposals for grant funding. As you know, we've not had success in finding funding to date, particularly with local authorities such as the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District, but we continue to look for grants wherever we can. And the USGS, and I believe the Watershed Erosion Task Force, believe that if the study is completed, it will help us to basically promote the project and leverage grant funding in the future. The department is respectfully requesting authorization to prepare future legislation for the engagement of the USGS for this 2-year study. At mid-year budget, the department will discuss in greater detail how it would like to fund this first year and then proceed forward in future years for year 2. But at this stage, the department would not have prepared for any of the July meetings, the legislation, but would wait till after mid-year budget adjustments. That works with the timeline of the USGS, which again is a federal agency, and its fiscal year doesn't start until October 1st. But tonight, the department wanted to provide you the recommendation, a short explanation, and with that, it will be available along with the Director of Public Works and the members of the City Council that are on the task force to explain the details if needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And just an information question, what's the cost again? 100,000 what?
It's over the 2-year time frame. It would be $170,500.
Okay. And do we know how much of that would be in the current fiscal year and how much would be in the next fiscal year?
$105,200 in the first year, and then $65,300 in the second year.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rambo. Councilor Rambo sent an email to all of us earlier today on this. Go ahead, Ron.
Yes, actually, my email was only sort of tangentially related to the USGS proposal, which is going to provide vital, I think, mandatory data for the work that we're going to do as we go forward. It looks like a really good study to me. I have no quibbles with it whatsoever. My email concerned the nuts and bolts of the plan and our guidance to the consultants to work together. I'm not sure that it's happening, and I wanted to make that some sort of mandate rather than a request. And I think we can handle that in the WETF. I would defer to Chair Farmer and Director Vunich for determination of that. If that's the case, we don't need to carry the discussion any further. So, Joe, what do you think of that?
Joe Benich or Joe Farmer?
Did you have a chance to, oh, Joe Farmer already nodded in the affirmative, so I'm asking Mr. Vunich, actually.
With the mayor's permission, certainly I've noticed that there's been a bit of a disconnect between the engineering consultants and Dr. David Hammer. And I think I have addressed it sufficiently. I sent emails to all three parties asking them to focus on the project, not personalities. And certainly anything that would be done by the engineering team would have peer review by Dr. Hammer. And that would happen early on and throughout the development of any engineering proposal or design. And then at the conclusion to ensure it meets all the city's requirements. Thank you.
Satisfies me.
Okay, Councilor Farmer.
Yeah, I think certainly we can get that situation addressed in the committee, but I do want to share with everybody that it was a genuinely unanimous thought that this study is really, really of critical importance to what we're trying to get done. There are a lot of opinions on how we're going to be able to go about fixing this, but everyone's opinion is pretty much universally it is going to be expensive to get done. And so getting the best possible framework and information that we can, it's just of critical importance to get the plan done. The other thing that is super important is their fiscal year begins on October 1st. So if we're able to get them an executed contract by October 1st, they would be able to start roughly 3 months later, which would get everything planning in place for theoretically the storm season of 2022. So I think we have some time to get the logistics here figured out, but I would invite any of you that haven't seen them to take a look at some of the meetings that we have. I think that our consultants are doing some great work and they've got some great pictures of, decks getting ready to fall in the creek and things like that. So our time to kind of punt this away for another year or two is certainly past. We've been assured by everybody, I believe, including Dr. Hammer, that the longer we delay on this, the more expensive this problem gets. It's not going to get any easier. So I would encourage you guys to think very carefully about this. I believe we'll do this at the mid-year budget, but I do think that there's actually some money that we've already allocated that can be used for this process as well. So I think the funding mechanism is probably pretty easy, but we shall see.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question to our city administrator and or Joe. What do we have in the budget for this? And if we don't have anything in the budget or all of it in the budget, what is the recommendation, if any, as to how we're going to pay for it?
Well,
Joe Benich.
Mr. Mayor,
Go ahead. Joe, I'll let you go first.
all right. Thank you, Mr. Cross. As you know, at the start of this fiscal year, $125,000 was set aside for stormwater projects, particularly those identified by the Watershed Erosion Task Force. Currently, we spent about $13,000 of that on our consultants, principally Dr. David Hammer, Joe Wilson, and Todd Wagner. That means we have approximately $112,000 available, which would easily cover the cost of the first year of the study. But I know that we have some outstanding balances with regards to our consultants that haven't been invoiced yet. That's why I've suggested to wait to mid-year so that we can have a better understanding of what our expectation is for the remaining 4 or 5 months of this year with our consultants, so that we can set aside enough for them as well as this first year of study, and we don't have to do an end of year budget adjustment. Thank you.
But Joe, in a worst case scenario, let's just focus on the first year. Given your recollection of what invoices are out there that we need to pay, how much more would that take away from the 125, do you think?
I believe that between Mr. Wilson, Mr. Wagner, and Dr. Hammer, we probably have another $15,000 to $25,000 of outstanding work. That would include a potential second proposal from Wilson Hydro, Joe Wilson and Todd Wagner, for some permitting work in advance of the first project. So, like I say, if we do the numbers, or at least the numbers I've crunched, we'll probably exceed what we have available sometime in the fall. That's why I'm trying to address it during mid-year.
Steve Cross.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Joe's assessment, but the bottom line is, your direct question to me was, do we have it in the budget? And the answer is, we do not. Given the amount, as Joe mentioned, $125,000, less the amount that have already been spent, and then the amounts to come, which I would guess are on the high side, the upper end of what Mr. Vunich just mentioned, so about 25,000. If we just take those numbers discretely right now, we would not have enough funds to cover it in the current budget. We would be making an assumption or making a budget adjustment at mid-year to either add additional funds to the budget or take them from someplace else to pay for this program, as well as the outstanding invoices to be paid.
And how much would we be short for the first year? So just to get to the 105, what do we need to come up with?
Mr. Mayor, I did a quick calculation and I'd say an additional $30,000. And what I would suggest is Mr. Cross just mentioned, and I wish I had, but thanks to Mr. Cross for mentioning it, is that, as you know, in our capital improvements program, there are always projects we think we're going to get to in a year. And oftentimes due to other priorities or just the workload, we don't. So my intent would be to find that additional money through the existing projects in the capital improvements program for 2021.
And so if the council wanted to move forward with this now, at least relative to the first year, do you think there would be any reason why we couldn't condition the second year obligation of the city, the additional 65 on, a second council decision based on a mid-year budget review, or a 2022 budget review would actually be more appropriate?
And again, the department was just seeking authorization for future legislation. I still believe that if we do our mid-year budget discussions in August and early September, we would be prepared by that October 1st deadline, which is the federal government's new fiscal year.
Councilor Farmer.
Certainly you guys are the number crunchers. So I agree with Mr. Vunich. I think we have some time to get this figured out, in the mid-range budget is okay. But the USGS did mention that they bill quarterly. So we would really, I think, only hit one quarter of this year and then move into next year. I don't know how that works with, moving our money around and things like that.
I mean, my thought was, if the council wants to do this and we want to get, as in moving forward with it. And Joe said that he thinks he can find another 30. I mean, I'm not seeing a reason why you couldn't just go ahead and get started with it. And if those invoicing things that you mentioned work in our favor as it moves forward, then that's just icing on the cake, so to speak. Councilmember Dodwell.
I was going to make mention of the same thing. Let's move this forward. I don't want USGS to get our request for work in October, and then that gets pushed back another 6 months in their calendar. They've got other cities, other entities that are asking for their assistance. So if we want to get this started next year, then I say we vote on it now and get it moving forward, and we will find funds throughout our budget or from some other source going forward. But we've been dancing around this issue for a couple of years now. Let's get some real work done. please.
Councilmember Clark.
I'd have to agree with Councilmember Dodwell on that. I've thought about this a lot, and just looking at it, this project is really doing things the right way and addressing the root cause, doing a root cause, an effects analysis, and a design failure mode analysis, so that we are doing engineering the right way. If there's not the money there to even find in projects that we aren't doing, we have made this strategic plan, and this is a high one. So maybe rearranging things that maybe are on the lower end of that priority list to cover some of this would be the right way to do it, so that we go to the root cause, fix the problem, so we don't keep putting Band-Aids on the effects that root cause is causing.
Thank you. Councilmember Edens.
Yes, motion to prepare legislation for authorization of a USGS geological survey with the city of Wildwood.
And Councilor Edens, before we move for a second, would you be agreeable, given the discussion, to making that motion relative to both years, but that the second year would be contingent on of 65,000 would be contingent on the council's further analysis at its 2022 budget review meeting?
I would be fine with that as long as there's not a legal issue with starting a contract with not guaranteeing funds.
As long as they agree to it, there's no legal issue. Is that correct, City Attorney Young?
We can certainly make it subject to appropriation.
Okay.
Okay, that would suffice, but I would insist upon it being a line item so that there isn't an issue. That would be great.
We're going to have an opportunity for that. Okay, so the motion is for the first year, my reasoning is, you probably know, just to ask Councilor Edens that question, is to not put so much pressure on the budget right now and do what we can do. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Councilmember Dodwell. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion on the motion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Excuse me. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, thank you. Last item before we get to strategic planning and Lake Chesterfield in particular is under miscellaneous. This actually relates to my property, and even though it's not required, I think the better course is for me to recuse myself from presiding at the meeting and to leave the room while it's being discussed. And I'm going to therefore turn the meeting over to Mayor Pro Tem Garrett.
Okay, this item here is on the receive and file. So the certificate of appropriateness review of the Gimbel St. Ange Cabin, a Wildwood Historic Register property for proposed alterations in Ward 6. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Mayor Pro Tem and members of the City Council. As you know, the city has a historic preservation and restoration code. Conditions associated with that code when a property is placed on the city's register are significant, but certainly workable. In this particular case, the Gimbel St. Ange log cabin was placed on the city's register a number of years ago. As part of that registry ordinance, any exterior alterations that may occur would have to be reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission and acted upon. Mayor Boland submitted to the Department of Planning a request to paint the doors on the log cabin as well as the window frames. Along with the request and additional information were paint samples that indicate the colors would be appropriate for the time frame, and the mix of the paint would be consistent with the type used in the mid-1800s. The Historic Preservation Commission considered this request at its meeting this past Thursday and by unanimous vote supported it. Therefore, the certificate of appropriateness can be issued based upon that action. Tonight, the City Council is receiving this report as a receive and file, and the department is available to answer any questions regarding it. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Vunich? All right, seeing none. All right, Mr. Vunich, so if there is no action taken, then this will just go ahead and proceed. That's correct?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
All right, any other questions or anything else regarding this matter? All right, seeing none, then that takes care of that one. Thank you. All right, we will ask for the mayor to join us again.
He left.
He was listening.
All right, thank you. So that takes, so that miscellaneous item is done, presumably. Yep, okay. So that takes us back to the first item, which is strategic planning. Okay, so we've had a hiatus for the last few meetings. We got a lot accomplished on this, and we just have a few items left. And I think we might be able to, for all practical purposes, finish it this evening, hopefully. Before we get into the last couple of items, City Administrator Cross provided everyone with another draft of where we are in terms of finalizing everything. And it contains lots of detail. One question I have before we move to, well, are there any questions on what you have been provided by the City Administrator, this draft? Councilor McCutcheon.
Can we have a written large copy like the one you just had? The only one I've seen is the one that's online.
I'm sorry, what are you asking for?
If we can have a large printout of this?
Yes.
Thank you.
So would everyone like a large printout of this?
No.
No. Anyone else who wants a large printout, please raise your hand. It'll be in your box upstairs within tomorrow. Anyone else? All right. So you'll have yours. All right. Any questions about the draft before we get into this? Okay. Seeing no questions, I have one question for the council. You may recall one of the last decisions the council made relative to the sub goals was just to leave them with no priority. Is that still where you stand today?
Mhm.
No interest in prioritizing.
No interest.
Prioritizing the sub goal. Okay. With that, we can now move into funding source discussion, and we really have two left of the extraordinary items, as I termed them initially, those being watershed erosion and Lake Chesterfield. Now, as to watershed erosion, my recollection is that there's a discussion, and Councilmember Farmer and others may need to involved in that committee may need to refresh my recollection, but I think the council requested the watershed erosion task force to look at funding options that might include bond issuances and that sort of thing. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And where is that, if you know off the top of your head?
I think Mr. Vunich, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, we've certainly kicked around the idea of bond issues, and in general, the committee is in support of doing that. I think the big concern is a bond issue is sort of viewed as a one-time fix to what is clearly going to be an ongoing issue. And so presenting that to the voters and saying, we're going to need a bond issue of, I'm just picking a number, this probably won't be it, it'll be big, $20 million to fix this problem. And we get that, but then we don't factor in it's going to cost $1 million a year to keep everything up. Again, these are not the real numbers. There was some concern about that. So the idea is, how do we approach this appropriately as an ongoing maintenance issue as compared to just a singular Band-Aid on a problem, so to speak.
City Administrator Cross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the mayor's permission and council's permission, I was asked to prepare a presentation to the Watershed Erosion Task Force regarding funding options with regards to the erosion issues. And if it's okay with you, I can go through those because it's a little bit more than just a bonding. So if it's okay, we'll just quickly and very, very briefly summarize the discussion that the presentation that I made to the WETF of last week. We did talk about bonding. We talked about general obligation bonds. That is something that has to go before the voters, and that requires a supermajority vote, meaning a 2/3 majority. Interest rates on general obligation bonds, which maturities would be anywhere from 20 to 25 years and be funded from a property tax or somewhere in the 2.5% range. There's something called a special obligation bond, which is secured through annual appropriations and are paid for through funds that are generated revenues to the city through other means. We can also discuss economic development sales tax at 1/4%. We can talk about a parks and stormwater tax at 0.5%. We have the option of a property tax. We also have the option of a neighborhood improvement district. That one might be a little more difficult, but there are several options to choose from, some perhaps better than others, perhaps. But bonding is just one in a 6 or 7 different options for funding these types of projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. And so I guess my question for Councilmember Farmer is one of the chairs of that task force. Do you have an idea roughly of when you think the task force might reach some sort of consensus relative to all these options with the report back to the council?
I mean, I believe if we kind of pressed that, the committee as a whole seems to be pretty much of the opinion that, we need to move this thing forward. So, the mixture, I think the idea is having a mix of something. I think that a 2/3 vote, everybody is of the opinion would be a pretty high bar to reach. Basically because there's an education deficit for people that perhaps aren't as acquainted with the creek as the rest of us are. So, I mean, I can certainly push the issue as much as necessary. But, in the end, we've had a wonderful member of our task force, Mr. Sturman, who has exhausted literally every possible option outside of either a bond or a tax of some kind. Certainly there is the idea that, the magic money fairy might show up here with some federal dollars, which would be great. But in the end, it seems to be pretty universal that this is going to be an ongoing issue and therefore would probably need some type of ongoing funding mechanism.
Okay. Councilor McCutcheon.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Councilmember Farmer's comment about bond issues and having to come back. I mean, school districts do it all the time. If you specify what the first bond is for, then you come back and you specify what the second one is for. So I don't really see that as an issue per se. I get having to pass it on 2/3. I get that because school districts have a hard time with that sometimes, but I don't see a problem with the continuation of multiple requests for bonds.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue is if you pass one, and as we've kind of learned, it's one of the reasons this USGS study is so important. If we are going to invest, theoretically, if we were to fix these pieces that we've looked at right now and the plans that they've put forth are right, I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 million, if I'm remembering correctly, to fix those issues. And when we fix those issues, invariably, there's going to be other ones. And so the concern is, because this has been sort of genuinely neglected for as long as it has, if we pass an initial bond and that bond then expires after that period of time, and then the general thought of the public is, well, that's a problem we don't have to worry about anymore. We're just going to keep replaying the same scenario over and over. I'm all for I'm all for communicating to people and get them to pass things all the time. I just know we need to get it fixed. At this point, I don't really care how we pay for it. I just know it needs to get done. So if it's multiple bond issues over a period of time, that's great. Just know that all of the thoughts that I'm hearing from the experts that we're paying to figure this out are telling us that this is going to be an ongoing maintenance issue. And so unlike schools, although I agree with you, unlike schools where you're paying for a new gym or whatever it might be, and then the next year you're going to pay for school buses, I think people are going to inherently have an issue at some point with repeatedly passing a bond issue to fix something that happens every 5 years. So to be honest, I don't care how we do it. We just got to get it done.
Thank you, City Administrator Cross.
Thank you. With regards to going back to the voters, in conversations I had with this with our economic advisor, if we are looking at this current the 6 sites that were discussed at the Watershed Erosion Task Force, totaling $6 million on the high end, the city can issue bonds at a higher amount. So the city could go for a $20 million bond issue. If that gets passed, then $6 million can be spent on that, and then the next group could be spent. So you don't have to go back to the well, so to speak, multiple times if you're able to pass a bond issue. And again, as you mentioned, the education piece is critical, but you just have to go to the voters one time. If you get that passed, then you can spend it when you need it, but you don't have to keep going back and asking again. Thank you.
So for purposes of strategic planning, and feel free to let me know if you disagree with this, as much as I think it would be good for us to have this finalized a little more concretely, like we do internet access or what have you. It seems that we have a task force of our residents that the council has asked to look at this, and that the better approach would be to wait until they come back with something that the council looks at and makes a decision on. And at that point in time, amend the strategic plan if needed. Well, it'll probably be needed as to responsible parties and who's going to do what, when, and where. Does that sound reasonable with everyone? Rather than trying to do it tonight and go ahead of what the task force might be coming up with. Is that reasonable? Any objection to that? Okay. So with that, we are left with Lake Chesterfield. And I think that everyone on the bench knows the issues with the lake, and we've actually had some discussion previous meetings relative to options that are under consideration. And before we get into the discussion of the money and what, if anything, the council wants to do, I think it might be helpful if, to the extent we can do it, from either Councilmember Hopper or Flasher to give the council the latest update in terms of what the options are to remedy the situation, and what seems to be the most, your projection, I guess, if you can do it, if you feel comfortable doing it, but the most likely choice of at least the HOA from Lake Chesterfield as to what they would prefer. So Councilmember Hopper.
Yeah, happy to provide an update. It's definitely an ongoing conversation with our HOA and our lake committee. So I'm picking it up. So it, as of right now, the lake committee has really explored multiple options, and we've really narrowed it down to realistically 2 that, between the overall cost and long-term viability, they're really primarily kind of focusing on 2 options at the moment. One is sort of the previous method, which was we drain the lake, we fill in the holes that have been identified by the latest survey, and then fill the lake up, and it's sort of a patch and pray, I would say, for lack of a better term. But based off of the last survey that we had of the lake, the repairs that had been done in the past under that same method are actually holding. The issues are there's just more holes than were filled and identified at the last time. The last work was performed without that survey, so it was without that knowledge of what exactly the ground looked like underneath and where those major trouble points were going to be. So does provide some additional information on how to be able to best approach that. So there's definitely a higher level of confidence that if we go that route, we'll be able to do a much better job of plugging the holes that are causing the major issues. There's just, again, with that method, there's just not going to be a guarantee that there won't be more sinkholes, there won't be more problems in the future, but we're hoping that we've identified the bigger areas and that being able to do that would be able to solve that problem. The other option right now that's on the table is a little bit more in depth, and that would be putting a liner into the lake itself. It's actually the same thing that they do for containment fields as well. So it's completely seals off the lake. And like I said, it's primarily used for things if there's dumping of chemicals and things like that, it would hold it, but it would provide a permanent solution, for lack of a better term, of the lake. It's just very work intensive. It's going to be a very expensive project. And again, we are a little hesitant on how much that might change the landscape and some of the other factors that would come into, as far as the fact that the lake does get runoff from neighborhoods. So we do have a concern about how much that would, from an environmental standpoint, of how much is going to get caught and built up in that lake. And so there's some extenuating factors that we really need to look at as far as that option, but those are the two primarily that we've come down to. And we still are kind of weighing those and getting some final numbers on what those costs are going to be. The filling the holes with the bentonite compound by far is the least expensive, but it's, again, it's doing it and hoping that we catch the major issues enough that we don't have major drainage like we have had in the past. But it's definitely the least expensive and the faster turnaround option. So as of right now, that's from an HOA and neighborhood perspective, those are the two best options we've come with, and we're still kind of working through what those are going to look like.
So relative to the cost, ballpark on each one of those?
So for filling the bentonite, our ballpark is probably around $350,000 for this route. Again, that's a pretty early estimate. It could vary pretty greatly as they get in. We're waiting for some final numbers on that. The liner option is closer to somewhere around $750,000. It's a lot of prep work that would go into the case. And that's where a lot of the cost comes in, is they have to drain the lake. They have to basically dredge the entire bottom of it again, prepare the whole lake bed to provide that liner, and then put the liner down. There's a lot of prep work for that, and then getting everything set back up. So also transport cost of the liner is pretty substantial, that goes on to that as well. So as you can tell, that's a much more expensive option, but it's a more long-term in relation to the liners. The company that provides those and does that installation, we're given a 20-year warranty on the liner itself and on the work. So we have, like I said, it's a little bit more of a long-term solution, but it's definitely a much higher investment.
So as you know, some of the meetings I've had with the HOA, the option was also discussed relative to infilling essentially the north third, roughly, of the lake that has the majority of the current leaks, and they are not interested in that anymore. That's off the table, do you think?
No, yeah, there's just the relative cost with that too kind of comes in as a pretty high standard, just because we're going to have to move the spillway. There's going to be a lot of bringing the dirt in and filling out, and the major concern that we get is also the how the lake is sort of laid out, when the 1/3 by a straight line, the 1/3 where the problems are is actually the widest part of the lake. So if we filled it in to where we covered the holes that are going to have the problem, we really actually lose probably half the volume almost of lake water. So I think we'd have probably some complaints in general just from its ability to act as, and it is a watershed of where it would retain the correct amount of water. So we have not contacted MSD, but I can't imagine they would be thrilled with the fact that we would lose half the volume of the water it could hold. And just the in general cost of filling it and having to move that spillway as well. And just in general, where we've had feedback from folks in the neighborhood and residents are not real keen to filling the lake.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the update. Councilmember Fleischer, anything to add?
No, he pretty much covered everything. Thank
Okay.
you.
Councilor Rambo.
Yeah, just real quickly, I did have some questions. First, the 1/3 that's most problematic, where is that in relation to the road that belongs to Wildwood or that Wildwood maintain?
It's that side of the road.
It's that side, right next to it. Can you, I've never seen any images of the size and shape and configuration of the holes themselves. Are they large holes that you could drive a bulldozer into, or are they is it just seepage?
So no, they're definitely, I would say you could drive a bulldozer into them, but a couple of the holes that we're having a problem with are, from a diameter perspective, are not very wide, but they are completely open down sinkholes. Except for two of the issues. There is one other major issue along one bank line. And it was actually a point of contention, I guess, when they did the work before, that where a lot of the dirt was moved to the side where that was, it was actually a weak point as well. So rather than that being filled with the proper materials, it was just kind of filled over with the silt that was from the bottom of the lake. And so that's now a larger area that would have to be mitigated. But that's the only really large square footage area that's a problem. Most of them are not really wide areas, but they're just deep holes that are completely open.
If we could, Councilmember Rambo, I think it may be helpful in further response to your question, if Rick or Joe, who were involved with the procurement of the geophysical surveys that have been done, they could probably, one or both of them might be able to add some additional information for the council's benefit relative to where the holes are located and how big they are. Are you
Sure. I'm driving to one particular point. I'm assuming that the liner is like EPDM, something like that. Is it like a rubber based bottom product? Yeah. So if you have a void the size of a truck that opens underneath that liner, that EPDM is going to fail, and you can find a reputable contractor to do that work. And the manufacturer will stand behind the product, but the failure itself is going to cause the leak again. So I'm not sure it's the permanent solution that you guys are looking at. And I have more comments and questions, but I'll just save them for later.
I think there may be some sinkholes there, but Joe Benich, I see you came on. Do you have any additional information relative to the extent and nature of the holes, the drains that are occurring in the lake, and where they're located and how big they are and that sort of thing based on the geophysical survey that was done?
Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, I believe Councilmember Hopper has done an excellent job of describing the locations. As you know, we did prepare that report with the assistance of a number of scientists from the University of Missouri-Rolla, now Missouri Science and Technology. And they are isolated in the northern third of the existing impoundment. And they do include some in the center of the lake, as well as along that, what I described, the northeast corner of the lake, that bank area. And Mr. Brown may have more to add. Thank you.
Rick Brown, anything further?
No, Mayor, I really don't have anything further. Joe summarized it very well.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Rambo, anything further?
No, I don't want to take up the whole meeting, but
So the reason I had asked for the background ultimately, so it was obviously to get the council up to speed on where things are, both with respect to the situation as well as the money. But ultimately, the decision before the council is whether it wants to participate to any degree, regardless of any of that, in the Lake Chesterfield situation. And as you know from our prior discussions with respect to internet access, watershed, and so forth, there are three options: participate fully, participate none, no participation, or participate to some degree. So that's the reason ultimately this is on the agenda for this evening. Councilmember Edens.
Yes, thanks. Nathan, good job with your explanations. I just have a couple of really quick questions, but first a statement. This came in, honestly, better than I expected in terms of overall cost. Not that it doesn't have a sting for homeowners, but I did expect worse. The first question is about the life of the liner. So assuming that there's not a sorry, I don't feel well tonight in my, I'm not choosing my words well, catastrophic failure under the liner. So let's say that doesn't happen in Rob's example, although it could. Does the liner wear out after 30 years, 5 years, 10 years?
I be honest with you, I don't have the information on the actual full life expectancy, but the manufacturer does provide a 20-year warranty on the
20-year warranty. Okay, that's helpful to know. I'm just thinking
idea
about,
on-
yeah, long-term costs in my heads. And then can you tell me how much you normally take in as an HOA? So just not a special assessment, just your normal assessment. How much do you guys bring in as an HOA in terms of dollars yearly?
I'd have to have that in front of me. I'm sorry, I don't have that.
Okay, and then I would also want to know, because a lot of times, you know, neighborhoods are able to save money, so how much you have set back, because if we're gonna have a conversation about how much we should contribute or if we should contribute, I need some financial transparency from the HOA, and I want to know what you guys are going to contribute, because if you already have a couple $100,000, that would be really helpful to know. So I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but if everybody else agrees that that information would be helpful, you know, should we postpone a vote on this? Essentially, I'm wondering how much you guys already have versus how much you need, and if a special assessment could easily cover it, because I know there's hundreds of homes, especially because there's apartments there. So I was trying to get a number in my head of what the burden would be per household if there was a one-time special assessment for that $750,000.
Right, and I guess I don't have the exact numbers, but I will let you know that, I mean, we do have a certain percentage of our HOA fees is every year is dedicated to go to a lake fund that provides maintenance for that. Again, I don't have the numbers right in front of me to tell you off the top of my head, but I mean, we do have some money set aside for it. It is by no means going to cover the cost of either of these options, but there is some aside, but we definitely not have to cover the cost.
Sure.
And I think related to Councilmember Eden's question, if the council agrees that that information would be helpful, I would add to it how much each of the options, well, number one, to finalize as much as possible what the cost would be. And then number two, how much does that translate to in terms of each member of the community?
Right, and what we talked about in general is, you know, expanding that, you know, word community so that it includes other neighborhoods in the future that drain into you. I think that's fair. It fixes a free rider problem, and it sounds like there would need to be a legal mechanism like a NID or a SID. But if with the structure of who contributes now, if you use what's ever in reserve, and I mean, if you can fix this with a special assessment of, you know, an additional $500 per household or $300 or $200, then we don't have to have this conversation. I just need a little bit more transparency first.
Councilmember Farmer.
Yeah, I'm kind of along the same lines as Ms. Eden. I do think, though, that Lake Chesterfield gives us a unique, large scale view of a problem that is repeated all over the place in our city. I mean, in my subdivision, we have 383 homes. We have, I think, the second largest lake next to Lake Chesterfield. I've talked to MSD. There are 3 houses out of 383 that drain water into that lake, but we are responsible for 100% of the cost, which in my subdivision is about 8% of every homeowners association paid in every single year. So when I mapped it out with MSD, they could show me the, you know, I think it was 700 additional homes that were feeding into my lake. And this is going to be an issue that will repeat itself over and over. I mean, we've learned very clearly with the Watershed Task Force that filling in this lake and taking out an ability to retain water would be absolutely catastrophic to what we're trying to do in other places. Putting a liner in that would mean that it can't function anymore properly would do just the same thing. So one of the things that we've talked about both in the Watershed Task Force and in others is doing things the right way the first time. So I guess my question, I don't know if Dan, I don't know if you or Nathan know the answer. Do you guys know how many homes are in the actual association?
Councilor Hopper.
Yeah, there is roughly, last count, I think 680. Again, don't remember that well, but somewhere around 650 to 680, I think is what our homeowner count is.
Okay, so I mean, well, that would be, let's say, somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000, $2,000 on a special assessment. That certainly wouldn't be, I'm sure there would be a whole lot of people excited about that. But, you know, the truth is that is a private lake that is in a private space. However, it encroaches on a public road and feeds into a public waterway. Just like this case, we've got a homeowner in Ward 5 whose backyard is literally falling into a creek. Their deck is on a good storm day, it's possible that that deck is going into the creek. So we're going to have this issue in every ward, in every neighborhood in the city, and looking at it in terms of figuring out either from a city standpoint, where is this water coming from and where is it going? Because people are of the idea that the water drains off of their house into the sewer and then it is gone and it's not their problem anymore. And that is just not the case. I think if there's 700 homeowners in, you know, the HOA, and you find that there's another 700 of them that are feeding into this thing, I don't know what the mechanism is for the city to try to regulate who is paying into what, but I think regardless of how we're fixing this or the watershed, we're going to have to figure that out, because I can tell you on a much smaller scale, my subdivision, our homeowner association fees are minuscule based on the rules that were created well before anybody was involved. We can raise them literally $5 a year. So right now we pay $200 a year in subdivision fees. That is ridiculously low living out here, and spending upwards of $7,000 to $8,000 a year on a pond that nobody uses and very few people even know is there. It's a difficult message to sell to people. But when the pond doesn't function, it's pretty gross. I mean, we've had Mr. Vunich out to look at it when it looked like a toxic waste dump, lime green, fish dead everywhere, water doing God knows what. So I think this is a big plan, but I do think approaching it from a standpoint, I will say, I think approaching it from a combination of a public and private thing is probably the most appropriate thing. I know I've tried as an HOA to just ask my neighbor associations, hey, you want to contribute to this? And the answer was no, but we're really glad it looks nice now. Thanks a lot. That's the answer we're going to get. So unless we push the envelope on some of this stuff, there's going to be some people left holding the bag.
So any other subdivision, you know, for example, those that drain into Lake Chesterfield would need to approve in their own right, being part of a neighborhood improvement district or whatever to participate. There wouldn't be, therefore the reverse is true, which is there wouldn't be the ability of Lake Chesterfield or the city to make them do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one could also argue from a neighborhood sort of get alongness standpoint, that's probably what you want, rather than trying to push them into doing something, but they would need to approve that. Councilor Bertolino. Okay, Councilor Roast.
Yeah, I agree with basically what's been said tonight, but another thought I have though is that would it be should the HOA really just come back to the city with a proposal? I mean, like come back and say, we want the world, or come back and say, we want 250,000. I mean, there seems like there should be a starting point where, they come back based on, the number of homes, the health of the HOA, the past experience with assessments. I mean, their desire to keep it private to their subdivision versus opening it up to the city. I think everybody up here realizes the benefits that it provides with the overall waterways, but I think it'd be good just to have them come back with, what do you want? And ask the city, and then it begins it's a starting point.
Well, if we can get the information that Councilmember Edens and I and a couple of others mentioned relative to the numbers, we're essentially going to have that. I mean, and I think we can safely assume they'd take whatever the city would want to, we'd give them on it. and have them here as a resource and so forth. But I think either way, we're going to get to that point. That's what I'm trying to say. So.
And I think I can also, I mean, to that fact you kind of mentioned, I mean, anything that would relinquish any control of the lake, removing it from private to public, would be an insurmountable obstacle to cross in our neighborhood.
And the converse of that is, I think our residents would have a lot of issues with the city doing something that it didn't have any say in whatsoever. That would be an issue. Councilor Garetano.
I just wanted to share some perspective here, and this will echo some of what Councilmember Farmer said. It is an issue that is around this area. In fact, the meadows at Cherry Hills, the pond there lost all its water 20 years ago. And so the subdivision had to pay for it. And so there was an assessment. And then since that time, the subdivision has put money aside. Basically, we have now the same amount of money, maybe a little bit more, obviously trying to keep up with inflation, so that it is a rainy day fund. So should we wake up one day and the water is missing, and that's tens of thousands of dollars. Now, it is an issue, obviously, that's going to be in other areas, and just in the areas around here, you've got the enclaves, Crown Point Estates, Villages of Cherry Hills that all have ponds. And so my thoughts are that we have to also think about how we handle this, and certainly open up the door of how we handle others. Because if we do for one, we have to be fair and do for all the others. So it does set a precedent. It opens up potentially for the city being responsible for other issues that are technically in the private category. Where I do see where the city can support, at least in my opinion, is, from an engineering perspective, if we have the talent, the resources on staff, that can provide some guidance, opinions, or things like that. And we've done some of that already, the city with the prior study there. So I do think there's an opportunity where we can help. Where I do think we'll run into issues is where, there's a certain amount of money going over. And to the point that was just raised, if it's public use, then I think that certainly is more open for folks to understand. But otherwise, I've gotten questions unsolicited from folks that have brought it up about where we are with this and why are we doing this. So just some perspective and thoughts. I sympathize with the issue. I mean, we want to try to get you to a point where you're good, but I think we'll have to be cautious.
Councilor Dodwell.
Okay, we've had a lot of conversation about Lake Chesterfield as a separate entity. I still don't understand why we're talking about Copper Lakes as part of our budget, because that, to me, a retention pond for them is their expense. But isn't this part of the whole watershed discussion, guys? Just as Councilmember Farmer had mentioned, all of these things trickle or voluminously flow from one spot to another spot to another spot. I've watched Cox Creek since I've lived here for 25 years go from a good old fashioned country creek that supported Timber Ridge Estates, but since we've had other subdivisions upstream from that go into play, now it's washed out. I've got neighbors down the street whose watershed levels have lowered. Personally, I think we need to move Lake Chesterfield in with the rest of the watershed erosion task force, and it becomes part of the overall equation, but the city doesn't pick up the total cost to reline it so that you can have a pretty lake. From my perspective, my subdivision has 2-3 retention ponds, and most of the time we're paying to have the grass mowed in them because they only hold water when we have too much heading down the stream. So I just can't vote for the city spending taxpayer dollars if we're not looking at Lake Chesterfield as part of the overall equation for erosion control throughout, because otherwise Timber Ridge Estates, Evergreen, all these other subdivisions that are backed up to creeks in various places are going to start asking for the same kind of support. And I just think we need to look at, Lake Chesterfield needs to be moved up into the Watershed Erosion Task Force, from my perspective.
Councilmember Garetano.
Yeah, Councilmember Dodwell was mentioning something and it made me remember a comment that I was going to make, is that here I feel that MSD is not fulfilling their responsibilities when it comes to stormwater. They do a pretty good job when it comes to sewer, because if we didn't have sewer, we'd have bigger problems. But when it comes to stormwater, they obviously have told us that they do not have the funds to be able to do things. And really, see, to me, that means what's missing here is there's an authority that's missing here that oversees stormwater. And some cities have gone and formed sometimes authorities or types of agencies that overlook that, where they collect money and then that pays for it. But it's a monumental task probably to do that. I mean, it's certainly, that's a question that we probably would have to understand better, but, or does MSD have to really just step up to the plate and we have to hold them to their responsibilities? And I'm assuming we're not the only ones, right? We have a lot of municipalities that are probably dealing with similar issues as us. And so MSD keeps saying, we don't have the money. And I guess they put it to the voters. The voters don't want to pay for it. But then we have the issues and they come back to us as the municipality dealing with it. So just a thought out there, there's a void out there, and I think we're trying to fill bits and pieces of it. But, probably the more perfect solution is it's got to be a system-wide issue that needs to be resolved.
Okay, councilors, we're up against 7 o'clock, and I think I'm going to make a suggestion here in a minute. Councilmember Edens.
Yeah, 2 points. One was a clarification. Jim, earlier you had said that the individual subdivisions would have to vote, and they're not going to vote to make themselves pay. I just had a quick kind of a legal loophole question, and I was under the impression that this was true really for Councilmember Hopper, but couldn't Lake Chesterfield insist that if other subdivisions were not interested in paying a maintenance fee voluntarily, that they untie their drains and do not use their private lake as a draining, because they own that property?
MSD has jurisdiction of it, so MSD would not let them do it.
Oh, but every time, I just say that because every time we deal with MSD, they throw their hands up and they say, we don't own it. Whenever they don't want to take responsibility, they say the HOA owns it. So it's kind of like having their cake and eating it too, if the HOA really owns it. And I mean, all right.
I don't disagree.
Just a side question, because there could be nothing, preventing another subdivision from building their own MSD mandated volume sized retention or detention basin. And I don't think this is appropriate to send to the Watershed Erosion Committee only because it's already included in discussions of looking at retention and detention caps and the control meter rate and flow of water. And the reason why I don't think we want to move this entirely to the committee is this discussion with the HOA has, for the past couple of years since I've been on council, has been about maintaining aesthetics. The creek erosion that I'm concerned about doesn't depend on having a functional lake that you can sail on. All I care about is when it rains that the water drains at an appropriate rate that doesn't wash out the creek. And so when we had homeowners 2 years ago, come in and talk to us and say they want to maintain their lake, they'd like it to be private, they'd like it to be full all the time, I understand it, I get it, but that's not the same concerns of the Watershed Erosion Task Force. So if you want to talk about budgeting for aesthetics, for looks, it belongs here.
City Attorney Young, you want to respond to Councilmember Eden's point about turning off water to other subdivisions and how it relates to MSD jurisdiction?
Well, there's a number of issues involved in that and the prospect of that. And I understand where you're coming from. Us. The short answer is, because they are still subject to the MSD regulations, whether they own or can operate or have the money to improve it, they're still subject to the regulations, which would require them to for the water to still flow the same way it flows.
Okay, so we're now at past 7 o'clock we need to get into the next meeting. Councilor Clark.
Yeah, I had two questions. I'll make it quick. The first one is, what is the percentage of aesthetics that this project is concerned with? Is it 100% aesthetics or health or environmental? The second question is, if you brought up the liner for the lake, if we go with something like that, if the subdivision decided on that, if it's bentonite type clay liner, that's going to increase the impervious surface. If it's the EPDM, ethylene propylene diene rubber that Rob was talking about, that's going to be even more of an issue with impervious surface area, or urethane or whatever it's made out of. I don't know what it's made out of. I don't know anything about lake liners. So if we increase that impervious surface area, that is definitely a watershed erosion issue.
So let me ask this to the council. Is there any objection? And Councilmember Hopper, if the council wants to do this, you can let us know. Do you need at the time of the next meeting or 2 meetings away? At some point over the next 30, 45 days for Councilmember Hopper working with Councilmember Fleischer to come back to the council with answers to maybe those questions, as well as the questions that Councilmember Edens posed in terms of specific costs and how much you have in the bank and your residents. And I added 1 or 2 into that. And then the council can basically get more information, and then the council can decide what it wants to do and discuss the watershed issue and make a decision. Is that fair with everyone? Any objection to that? How much time do you need?
I would say at least probably a month would be a cushion of time, would hopefully be by the next meeting, but maybe the next one to get it all together, because we're still finalizing some of the information for the call.
You wait till August, you can get some pictures of the dry lake.
Probably could. Got pretty low the last few weeks before all this rain.
Okay, so you think the end of July, is that what you said there?
Yeah.
Okay, so second meeting in July, so basically 30 days. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, that's what we're going to do. Anything else before we go to adjourning the work session? All right, seeing none, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn the work session made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Bros. As you know, it's non-debatable. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so we'll take just a few minutes break, and then we will get into a meeting of the council.
I just thought, I didn't know if it was an intentional play on words.
I can tell you everything. I mean, I asked the mayor, and he said, stay out. Because I can tell you how much you pay the special assessment, I can tell you the report, because I looked at that report every month. Okay, so I know where the issues are, and I know that, we have, I could have answered the question, we have 600, now he's home, we had 660. Okay, we each paid $1,000, it's $650,000, right down the damn hole. Okay, then they've been setting aside at least $50 more since 04, 05, or 06, putting in a kitty or the lake. Okay, so when they say how much is sitting in the reserve, there's a whole lot. Okay, and he started pitching because there's a whole lot, there's a couple $100,000. I don't see the much on that. A lot of money in that pot of money that we all that paid in for the last 18 years. Huh?
I've been there since I know all of it. I've talked to the Leaky Lake Committee. I believe me, I know everything there is to know about that lake and where the money is, where it's gone and everything. But anyway, so there's money there. Now, is it $750 million? Now, there was, we all paid $1,000 assessment. Try to pass another assessment, special assessment. Oh my God, they'll be, because it hasn't been handled right. So we all paid almost $750 million in. And that, okay, now the thing is, look at that lake and how long it has been full. There's shifting, well, there's been shifting going on. Okay, so those holes that were there, okay, whatever, they have sealed themselves. Okay, it'll go down when you get to the drive. All it is, one good rain is it back up. So it is beautiful. Yeah.
Where's your bell? Yeah, I forgot it. You know, I'm a good Catholic boy. You gotta tuck in your shirt for a bell. All right.
Well, and I didn't get the bell.
I'm colorblind, so I.
Oh, yeah.
They did that the last time. I'm not wearing a pink shirt. We're not going to. Pretty much going to take care of things. There are a lot of folks that don't want to. So pride in the really. Yeah. On that thing, that's all. Great. You know, it's values of our. It really does. It's kind of expensive. It's a problem. People come look at your house. They're driving in their car. But that can be said for. Well, then all homes, realistically, all home values are at 5 a little bit. Somebody turning a house.
Because in order to bills. I'll look at that. Yeah. That's what. Yeah. You know.
Yeah, I think so.
About something else.
I think it's just that
I don't know how much.
Scott, when I was running for city council, I didn't want everybody to know that on the site that it's.
Oh, yeah. Like I was out Saturday morning, I was on Woods Road, halfway between 109 and Manchester. And there was a tree across the road. So it's a good thing I came across it because then I took a picture of it, sending it around, so we could get a crew out there and get the tree off the road. And then this morning, where we live in West Hampton Woods, there's that asphalt trail that goes out the back. I'm trying to put that street, Garden Valley.
All right, council members.
Yeah. And,
All right. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the city council for the city of Wildwood for Monday, June 28, 2021. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you. And thanks to the members of the public who are here and maybe joining us virtually online. Ms. Eldridge, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Bowen,
Here.
Councilmember Galani,
Here.
Councilmember Hopper,
Here.
Councilmember Jaxi,
Here.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Here.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Here.
Councilmember Ottenberg,
Here.
Councilmember Edens,
Here.
Councilmember Bros,
Here.
Councilmember Garitano,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo,
Here.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
Here.
Councilmember Farmer,
Here.
Councilmember Nyan,
Here.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Here.
Councilmember Clark.
Here.
All right, thank you and welcome again, everyone. For those of you who are comfortably able, if you would please stand with me for our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you. Moving next on the agenda to approval of the minutes from the City Council's June 14, 2021 work session and regular meeting. You've been provided with those. If there are any questions, now would be the time. Otherwise, I would ask for a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Made by Councilmember Ottenberg, second by Councilmember Galani. Any discussion on the motion? Councilmember Clark.
Yes, under page 3, the work session minutes, under emergency authorization for demolition of the single-family dwelling, I was under the impression that that motion was to proceed with giving the permit to the new owner of that property to do the demolition, not for us to proceed with the demolition. Am I incorrect?
Joe Benich or city clerk or anyone else, we'll start with the two of you. You recalled, I thought it was to proceed with demolition, but Joe, Joe Benich, what was your recollection of that?
Mr. Mayor and members of council, the request of the department was to authorize the issuance of the authorization to allow the property owner to proceed with demolition.
Okay, so let me just read this real quickly. So then actually, Councilor Clark is correct. I think that the minutes should say to authorize proceeding with the demolition. Is there any objection to doing that editorially? To authorize proceeding with the demolition rather than to proceed with the demolition. A little distinction there. Maker and second of the motion, good with that? Since the motion's been made, the motion's in the purview of the council. It'll take unanimous consent for that to be done. Is there any objection by any member of the council to changing that motion as I indicated editorially? Okay, thank you, Councilmember Clark, for bringing that to our attention. You are correct. Seeing any other discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion on the motion, all in favor of the motion to approve the minutes as editorially changed, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
One abstention, Councilmember Bartoni. Any other abstentions? All right. That moves us to public participation. Do we have any speaker cards? Ms. Eldridge and Julian, any raised hands? Okay, so I will not read the things about that. Moving next to appointments, other than reappointments, a few of those that are on the consent agenda later in the meeting, we have one initial appointment, which is our municipal judge. And this will be for a term ending June 2023. Our current municipal judge, as you know, if you've looked at had a chance to look at my June 24 memo, is prohibited by state law from continuing further. And that occurred as of June the 11th, I believe. And so we need to have a new municipal judge. And so I set about a process of finding someone to present to you. And I'm very pleased to present a Wildwood resident who you may know. He's on our ARB at the moment and has been active in city affairs. He's also the current municipal judge for the city of Warrenton. So he has experience at this. Judge Bierman, would you like to come forward in case anyone wants to ask any questions or if you'd like to say anything?
Good evening. I would just be glad to answer any questions that any of you may have. And
anyone have any questions for Judge Bierman? All right, so he's from Ward 5, by the way. Councilmember Garetano.
Actually, if it's okay, it's just a comment, really.
Sure.
That's okay. I just was looking at your background and it's very impressive. I appreciate your service that you're doing over in Warrenton. So I'm thrilled that you are here before us tonight. So
I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to, as the mayor said, I've been a longtime Wildwood resident and I'm looking very forward to this opportunity. So
well, thank you.
Thank you.
And one of the things, as you might expect in terms of being the judge, is to have good judgment. And in my experience, Bill has repeatedly demonstrated that. So if there's no further question, I would entertain a motion to approve the appointment as presented. Made by Councilmember Bertolino from Ward 5, seconded by Councilmember McCutcheon from Ward 5. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion on the motion to approve Judge Bierman as our municipal judge, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Congratulations, Judge, and welcome to our team. If you don't mind, when you get your the earliest opportunity to forward a resignation from the ARB per the city attorney, you unfortunately will not be able to do both. And so we're going to be back to another spot on the ARB, council members. So I won't ask you to find someone to replace you. That's my responsibility. So, all right. Thanks so much for being here, Judge. We appreciate it. Congratulations again. All right. Moving next into public hearings, PZ 2-21. Ms. Eldridge, would you please read PZ 2-21?
PZ 2-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the updated 5 major elements of the town center plan, which includes the boundary map, the street network map, the regulating plan map, the neighborhood design standards, and the architectural guidelines, all of which have been under review and study over the past 24 months by the City Council appointed Town Center Update Team, TCUT, with ultimate action on the same being sought on the requirements of state statute, the city's charter, and local code. The Town Center Plan establishes goals, objectives, and policies for the development of the town center area to create neighborhoods which are self-sufficient in terms of their mix of land use activities the availability of green space and amenities for all age groups, and the coordination of its public infrastructure to be functional, safe, and aesthetically appealing to the community in its application with building architecture and other design components, inclusive of streets, sidewalks, trails, stormwater management facilities, and others. These components of the town center plan are intended to complement each other and create interdependence as well. Along with these goals, objectives, and policies, the town center area establishes types and densities/intensities of land use for these parcels of ground within the boundaries of the City of Wildwood Town Center area, all of which were the subject of the study by the Town Center Update Team, TCUT.
Thank you. I think that summary pretty much says it all. Joe, do you have anything, Joe Benich, anything further to add to that description or the material that's been provided to the council? Obviously, everyone knows there's been a lot of work that has gone into this, and I want to thank the Town Center Update team again for its excellent work in this regard. The Planning and Zoning Commission for its work in reviewing that occurred before this being presented to the council. And Joe, you and others that were part of that extensive process. So anything further you want to add relative to this other than, and when you're done, if you would just please let us know what it is you're looking, if anything, for the council to do this evening relative to PZ 2-21, I would appreciate that.
Well, certainly, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, obviously with this process, a presentation could go on for minutes and minutes and minutes. All I would like to do tonight is alleviate any concerns on the part of City Council that their due diligence practiced by the Town Center Update team, as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission, was extensive. I want to emphasize that the Town Center Update team took 24 months to complete its task. It covered every aspect of the plan itself, all 5 major elements, as well as almost every word in the plan document itself. Along with that, it did a survey of residents to understand their support for the town center plan and its components, and that is an attachment to their letter of recommendation. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on the matter, and after the public hearing, took the initiative to hold 2 work sessions on the plan to better understand the Town Center Update team's recommendations, as well as their questions. Ultimately, the Planning and Zoning Commission, by vote, adopted the Town Center plan in its updated form. And tonight, the department is respectfully requesting authorization to prepare the appropriate legislation for the City Council to endorse and ratify the plan as adopted by the commission. If there are any questions regarding the plan, process, or any other items, the department would be glad to try to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions for Joe? Councilor McCutcheon.
I don't have a question. I have a statement as part of the committee, if that's okay.
Sure, go ahead, without objection.
I have to echo the same comments that Mr. Bunich made. The task force, the committee spent a lot of time. We did analyze it very thoroughly, looked at every aspect of it, had many discussions. We had great chairmanship, leadership, and from the department as well, going through the process. And I think, can't speak for everybody, but I know the committee as a whole was very proud of the new regulating plan that is included in this updated town center policies, which was the neighborhood edge transition district. I know we worked on that very hard, and what that does is it decreases density and kind of acts as a buffer between the higher density developments and then the 3-acre plan. So Joe may want to talk a little bit more about that in detail, but I think that was a highlight of what the town center committee accomplished.
Yep, I would agree. Thank you. Any other comments? Do you want to make a motion? Councilor McCutcheon.
I move that we accept the recommendation of the Town Center Update Committee.
And have legislation prepared to affect it.
Correct.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded by Councilmember Galani. Any discussion on the motion? See no discussion on the motion. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, you'll be seeing the legislation. Moving next to PZ 6-21. Ms. Eldridge, would you please read it?
PZ 6-21, 173 Stones Throw Drive, care of Jeffrey Erb, 173 Stones Throw Drive, Wildwood, Missouri, 63038. A request for a change in zoning from the PS Park and Scenic District to the NU Non-Urban Residence District upon a parcel of ground that is 0.53 acres in size, which is located on the north side of Stones Throw Drive at its current terminus. The property was previously owned by St. Louis County, Missouri, and was part of Greensfelder County Park, but now the subject parcel of ground is under the private ownership of the petitioner, such being duly established by an approved boundary adjustment plat between the appropriate parties.
Thank you. Joe, anything you want to mention further relative to PZ 6-21?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just as a point of clarification, because some of the city council's members may not have had as much experience with this as the commission. Prior to the current owner purchasing this particular lot, the previous owners inadvertently installed a portion of their driveway and driveway apron onto property owned by St. Louis County, i.e. Greensfelder County Park. The park had done a survey of the entirety of the tract of land and discovered the encroachment. Immediately, the property owners addressed the encroachment by transferring a portion of their existing lot to St. Louis County and providing the portion of the lot with the encroachment to the property owners. The current owner of the property would like to build a garage on the triangle that was transferred from St. Louis County to the property that's part of Stones Throw Equestrian Estates Plat 1. Unfortunately, although the property was transferred and under private ownership, it is still zoned Park and Scenic District. And therefore, the additional garage, the outbuilding, could not be constructed based upon the zoning of the site. The Planning and Zoning Commission has reviewed the requested rezoning and was favorable toward changing it from the Park and Scenic to the NU Non-Urban Resident District. With that action, the department is respectfully requesting authorization from City Council to prepare the legislation necessary to change the zoning so the new owner of property can build his new garage on property that is part of his lot. Mr. Mayor and members of City Council, the department will be available for any comments or questions regarding the matter. And thank you to Mr. Jacquin for the assistance with the graphic.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions for Joe? If not, this is Ward 6. We entertain a motion to have the legislation prepared as recommended by the department. Any questions for Joe? Seeing none, Councilmember Rambo. Okay, so we have a motion to proceed with the drafting of legislation to affect the recommendation of the department. Is there a second? Thank you, Councilmember Jaxie. We have a second. Any discussion on the motion? Forgot where he was at the moment. Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. Thank you, Joe Benich. Moving next into second readings, we have one resolution, Bill 2620 is before the council for final passage, and it concerns Ward 8. Is there a motion for the second reading of the bill? Maybe Councilmember Galani. Garetano, and seconded by Councilmember Galani. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2620.
Bill 2620, an ordinance by the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing certain modifications to existing C8 Planned Commercial District Ordinance number 2549, which governs a mixed-use development located in the city's town center, downtown, and neighborhood general districts by allowing up to an additional 24 months for the submittal and action on the required site development plan, with such being consistent with the favorable action of the Planning and Zoning Commission that is set forth in its May 3rd, 2021 letter of recommendation on the same second reading.
Thank you. Joe Benich, anything further you want to add relative to Bill 2620?
Mr. Mayor, with your permission, just a few quick updates. The Department of Planning has been in contact with the development entity for the Prime Place And I do have good news. The funding that they were seeking from the FHA has been approved. And they do anticipate breaking ground sometime before the end of year. We'll see. Secondly, as of tonight's work session, the department has direction in terms of the sales trailer. Whether it should stay or go is dependent on improvements associated with the site. And then finally, all of the signage that referenced future sales has been removed from the trailer and the adjoining site. I'm available for any questions or comments. The bill has remained unchanged since its introduction. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Joe? Councilmember Farmer?
I think it's good news that they got funding today. That's great. I will say that I think, I guess then if they got the funding, I'm a little confused why they need 24 months to do anything. I think getting a project like this in the town center is a great idea in theory. But I'm a little concerned, as I have been from the beginning, that, putting that trailer out there isn't a great look. It's been there for, I don't know how long. I happened to check today. The website hasn't been updated. Their Facebook hasn't been updated in 3 years, from what I can tell. I'm a little perplexed at this point what the plan is. I mean, I genuinely hope that this project can work. I hope they can break ground. I know that there was issues from the beginning about what this project was going to be. I mean, I think that we just very respectfully ask that they move that trailer out of here until they kind of have this plan going a little bit better than what it seems. I did see the email and I appreciate the offer to do some different landscaping and things like that, but I just don't see this happening anytime soon.
Councilmember Bartoni?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's wishful thinking maybe, but can we make it a condition that the trailer has to be moved to extend this?
City Attorney Young, can that be an amendment to the bill?
I'm not familiar enough with the permitting that was issued to allow it there in the first place to give you a definitive answer at this time.
Does Mr. Vunich know? the answer
Joe,
to
what
that?
can you enlighten the city
About the
attorney as to the
permitting?
permitting so he can maybe answer the question?
The miscellaneous regulations of the zoning ordinance is what allows sale trailers to be placed in advance of the construction of a residential development, mixed use building, et cetera. The regulations are already far exceeded in terms of the time frame. So I don't believe that the bill needs to be amended. I think it's an enforcement issue. The plea from the developers was, we're actually ready to go, and we think we'll be on site in less than 4 months. So that was the reason behind the letter at work session, to see if we could improve the condition over that 4-month period. And then if obviously development doesn't start in 4 months, then we could have it removed.
So would it be acceptable if we tonight, assuming the bill passes, ask the city clerk to place the issue of the trailer on the agenda 4 months from today for further action by the council if needed?
Well,
Councilmember Bartoni.
I would actually rather see this thing moved in the next 24 hours, just because we are starting to have events here in the town center in the next 30 days.
Okay.
And the thing's an eyesore. And I'm not a developer, and I'll refer to some developers. I don't know what it takes to move a trailer, but they moved it here.
Okay.
So they can move it somewhere else and they can move it back. And if
Okay.
I remember right, when Fisher started Brightly, they rented office space in town center and they were pre-selling houses out of a storefront. And maybe we give this guy a list of open storefronts that are in this area and he can rent space from one of our landowners and he can sell his stuff that way,
Okay,
but
so-
I don't want to see this trailer here, but we
I-
have the first event in
Okay.
July.
We need to find out what our options are. City Attorney, given what Joe Benich said relative to the permitting process for the trailer, what is your recommendation to the council if it wants to proceed with requesting removal of the trailer?
It sounds like the allotted time for the existence of the trailer on that lot has passed. And the city can commence with demanding its removal now. And if they fail to do so within a reasonable time, prosecution will be the appropriate remedy.
And is it inappropriate for that request to be made to Mr. Vintage by the council?
I think the message is loud and clear. I do not believe it requires an ordinance amendment and would not recommend one. It's just a factor of enforcing the ordinances that are already in place.
Joe, do you have that understanding?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I understand that the city council would like me to contact the development entity tomorrow and advise them to remove the trailer within a reasonable time. I don't know if that's 10 or 15 days. I'll have more information after I talk to them, and we'll advise council and everyone else by email.
So we've heard from two council members, but I want to make sure that the council is in agreement with that approach. Is there anyone who wants to speak against that approach? Councilor Garetano.
Yeah, first of all, actually more of a question for Mr. Vunich. Celebrate Wildwood Commission is relying on that property to hold the event. Is that the same owner as the trailer?
It is the same development entity. There's two parties, one of which owns the field that we're hoping to have Celebrate Wildwood on.
The only thing I would say is I'm concerned that, they may come back and then say, you may not be able to hold the event there. So that's the only thought I have, that we might want to be cautious about and how we go about this.
Councilor Bertolino.
Yeah, I disagree, Don. I don't think we should push the developer at this point. To me, it's not an eyesore, the trailer. Bales of hay just down the street. Yeah, that for me is an eyesore. But I don't think the trailer is obnoxious at this point. And if they are in fact going to be breaking ground in 4 months, I think we should let them do that. Maybe Joe can just send them a letter and say, hey, everything's been extended and we really expect you to keep your word and be breaking ground soon, or we may have to take action.
Councilor McCutcheon.
Yeah, I was going to mention the same thing Mr. Garantano did, but on the flip side of that, these developers have been before planning and zoning, the architectural review board, and council many, many times, changing their plan many, many times. And the last time we asked them, you won't, not to come back, and they agreed to that. But I get COVID. I understand the issue with COVID. But in combination with the trailer and promises, because they say they're going to be breaking ground in 4 months, that doesn't mean they are. And I would hope that, given that they are so residents of the city, that they would allow us to use that space. But I also don't think we can be held hostage when we have given them an extension on the time for the trailer to be there that's well past, and they still really haven't made any sales or really made any positive steps forward. So I can't support that.
Okay, so we have a motion. The motion on the floor is for the second reading of the bill. There is no motion on the floor relating to removal of the trailer. And we've had a fair amount of discussion about it tonight, as well as at a prior meeting. So what I'm going to suggest to keep the meeting on track is that if there's any further questions on the bill itself, and the city attorney is advised it would not be in order to or appropriate to amend the resolution, the bill relative to the trailer. That's sort of a separate issue. So I'm going to suggest that we deal with the motion at hand on the floor, which is up or down on the bill. And then depending either way on that, actually, if anyone wants to make a motion on the trailer, we can do it. Otherwise, we'll go forward with the next bill. Councilor Garetano.
My question would be, maybe if we look at the 24-month extension and consider something of a smaller time frame. Mr. Vunich, would you have an opinion on that? And would that be something that the council, because then once the extension is done, it's done. So right now it's 24 months. Is there a more reasonable approach to cutting that down?
Joe Benich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The department's recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission was half that time frame. The Planning and Zoning Commission chose the 24 months. Based upon recent conversations, I think somewhere around 6 months is much more reasonable now.
So hearing your recommendation, 6 months, and they've gotten the funding, so that would give them 6 months to get this, get all their documents in there. Mr. Vunich, you're fine with that?
Yes, again, remember, it's just the site development plan, which is the first step. So I think 6 months is reasonable. The
So you
site
want to make-
development plan acts as the preliminary plat, and that also then allows the Department of Public Works to issue the first of grading permits, generally clearing and grubbing. And so I think it works. It's the end of the year. And certainly if that would be the inclination of city council, I would encourage a postponement and allow the bill to be amended and reintroduced in 2 weeks.
Well, we can make, I think the council can make a motion this evening to amend it to 6 months, if it wants to do that. Do you want to make that motion?
Yeah, that's fine.
So we have a motion to amend the time frame from 24 months to 6. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Bartoni. So now the discussion is on the amendment to the bill, which is moving the time frame from 24 to 6 months. So any discussion on that item, and then we're going to go back to the main motion. Councilmember Farmer.
Mr. Vunich, I guess might be for you. So if their plan is to break ground in 4 months, don't they have to have all of this submitted by then in order to
Yes.
break ground?
Well, I have a little additional information. Ed Cohn, one of the partners of the development entity, called me on Friday and wanted a very specific checklist of steps for the site development plan, architectural review, the improvement plans, the construction drawings, and the record plat. I actually think you'll see the record plat sometime in July that adjusts the boundary lines of the property so as to accommodate the new building. So I actually think there's a lot of activity that's coming our way. And I believe 6 months is a reasonable time frame.
Okay, thanks.
Councilor Rambo.
Yeah, real quickly, there were some documented requested improvements, aesthetic improvements to the trailer and surroundings. Can we make this a 6-month extension contingent on taking those corrective actions as fast as they possibly can to address Mr. Bartoni's concern? Is that a legitimate addition? It's your motion, isn't it? Isn't it, Joe? Didn't you make the motion? Yeah. So is that a reasonable addition?
What was the question again, sir?
I suggested that we make the documented improvements that we've requested a contingency of this 6-month extension. So in other words, would clean up the trailer and its environments.
The city attorney has said he doesn't think that the council should put that in this bill. It should be a separate motion if you want to do that.
Okay, well, Joe, Mr. Vunich, can you speak to the status of those improvements? Are they ready, willing, and able to get those done in a timely manner?
I don't know if they're ready, willing, or able, but I was under the assumption, since no conversation was held at work session on this item, that the department could proceed and advise them that it needed to be completed. And I concur with Mr. Bartoni. I'd like to see it happen long before all of our events are completed, particularly the Celebrate Wildwood event.
So how's the best way to accomplish that if the city attorney advises us not putting us in the same motion? Make another motion? Is that what you're suggesting,
Yes.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll do that at the right time then.
Okay, any
you.
further discussion on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment, moving it from 24 months to 6 months, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have one opposed, Councilmember Bertolino. Any other opposed? Any abstentions? Under the charter, when a bill that's for second reading is amended, it must be approved by a 2/3 vote, which is a super majority. The theory being that the public has not had notice of that amendment previously. City attorney, yeah.
Just to be clear, it's still a regular majority to pass the bill, but it would be a 2/3 vote to proceed with final vote on the bill this evening.
Well, then we're going to have to re-vote that because we've already had the vote to proceed with. the final.
No, you've just amended it. Now I would ask for a motion to waive, let me read it, waive the 1 week posting requirement that's set forth in the charter. Typically, if you make an amendment, it has to be posted for a week before passage.
Okay, that's a different issue. So we've already got a motion on the floor for the second reading, which is passed. Is that correct? Okay, so we've already got that.
Right. Second reading, this is what final vote.
And so does the final vote need to be 2/3?
No, it's normal, but the vote to actually have the vote. Not-
It's already here for second reading though.
Oh, I understand. But typically, you can only amend after the second reading. Amended. It's supposed to be posted publicly for a week before that vote. Unless you waive that. That's when you do that too.
Okay, so it's not, okay, so now I understand. So the motion is, that's going to require 2/3 vote is for waiver of the posting requirement?
Correct.
Okay. Does anyone want to make a motion to waive the posting requirement relative to the amendment? Made by Councilmember Hopper, seconded by Councilmember Galani. Any discussion on the motion to waive the posting requirement? Councilmember Bartoni.
And just a question, and this would be for Mr. Vunich. Is this why you had originally said we could do this in 2 weeks so that we didn't have to go through this part?
Well, I was following what I thought was the logical process, but I'm not the expert on this. Obviously, the mayor and city attorney are, and I defer to them in all regards. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying we've never done this. I don't remember us ever doing this. This kind of seems pretty rare, I would say, even if we have done this. So I'm actually comfortable waiting 2 weeks on this.
So you can make a motion to postpone, which will supersede the bill at hand if you want to make a motion.
Yeah, I'll make the motion that we postpone for 2 weeks, post it for the public to see like we do everything else. And let's just kind of do business as normal.
Okay. The motion to postpone, is there a second to the motion to postpone? Seconded by Councilmember Bertolino. Is there any discussion on the motion to postpone for 2 weeks? Seeing no discussion, all in favor of the motion to postpone for 2 weeks, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, Joe, I'm just going to ask you a favor, given all the discussion and tentacles on this thing, if you could please package this with a bow for the next meeting, I would appreciate it.
I'll do my very best, sir.
Thank you.
And maybe also, Joe, just relay to the developer, there's a lot of angst about this also.
I think they're going
About
to,
that
they're going to get that
Trailer
from.
being there.
they're-
Yeah,
they-
maybe
they-
give them a list of some offices available. in
I
the
don't
area.
think there's any question they're going to know about that. So, all right. Moving next into first readings, Bill 2623 is before the council. It concerns wards 1 and 3. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill made by Councilmember Clark, seconded by Councilmember Ottenberg? All in favor of the motion for first reading, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2623.
Bill 2623, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute an STP urban program agreement by and between the city of Wildwood and the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission in order to proceed with obtaining federal funding to design and construct a roundabout at the intersection of State Route 109 and State Route EA South Junction. First reading.
Thank you. Rick, anything further you want to add to the information the council's been provided relative to Bill 2623?
No, Mr. Mayor, I have nothing additional to add, but I'm available for any questions from the council.
Any questions for Rick? All
Mr.
right.
Mayor,
Yes.
I'd like to make
Councilor
a
Roth.
motion that we proceed with the second reading of the bill tonight.
Okay, is there any, we have a motion for proceed with the second reading of the bill. Joe, is there any concern on the part of the department doing that?
I believe Rick
I'm sorry,
probably would
Rick.
appreciate
My
it.
apologies. Rick,
Mr. Mayor, no, the department would have no concerns with doing 2 readings tonight.
okay. Is there a second to the motion for a second reading this evening? Seconded by Councilmember Nyan. All in favor of the motion for second reading, this will take a 2/3 vote to do this in one meeting. So all in favor, we'll do it by voice vote to see where we get. All in favor of the motion for second reading, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have 2 opposed, Councilmember Flasher and Councilmember McCutcheon. Any other opposed? So the motion for second reading passes. Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2623.
Bill 2623, an ordinance of the city of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute an STP urban program agreement by and between the City of Wildwood and the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission in order to proceed with obtaining federal funding to design and construct a roundabout at the intersection of State Route 109 and State Route BA South Junction, second reading.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing no discussion, Ms. Eldridge, please call the roll for final passage of Bill 2623.
Councilmember Galani,
Yes.
Councilmember Hopper,
Yes.
Councilmember Jaxi,
Yes.
Councilmember Bertolino,
Yes.
Councilmember Dodwell,
Yes.
Councilmember Ottenberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Edens,
Yes.
Councilmember Bros,
Yes.
Councilmember Garitano,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember McCutcheon,
No.
Councilmember Farmer,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Bartoni,
Yes.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
The bill passes. Moving next to Bill 2624, it's before the council also for first reading, and it concerns Wards 7 and 8. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill made by Councilmember Galani, seconded by Councilmember Garitano? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2624.
Bill 2624, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to negotiate and execute an STP urban program agreement by and between the City of Wildwood and the Missouri Highways and Transportation Commission in order to proceed with obtaining federal funding to design and construct the Manchester Road and Taylor Road resurfacing project. First reading.
Rick, do you have anything further to say or mention relative to, or information relative to Bill 2624?
No, Mr. Mayor, I don't have anything additional to add. Again, I'm available for any questions or comments from the council.
Any questions or comments for Rick? All right, seeing none, it'll be on the council's agenda for its next meeting. Moving next, Bill 2625 is before the council for first reading, and it concerns Ward 6. Is there a motion for the first reading of the bill? Made by Councilmember Jaxi, seconded by Councilmember Rambo. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Ms. Eldridge, please read Bill 2625.
Bill 2625, an ordinance of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, authorizing the mayor to execute a contract on behalf of the city with TerraSpec for the development of design and engineer drawings and specifications for bidding purposes in association with the Bluffview Park upgrades, which would include construction administration / management services. First reading.
Thank you. Joe, anything you'd like to mention relative to Bill 2625?
Just a couple of quick points with your permission, Mr. Mayor. As you know, Bluffview Park opened in 2015. At first, it wasn't a very popular location because people didn't know of its existence. That has changed dramatically, and now with the efforts of Gateway Off-Road Cyclists, GORC, this park has become a hub for mountain biking and hikers and equestrian users. The Department of Planning in 2020 received permission from the City Council to submit a grant application to the Municipal Park Grant Commission, which was approved and totals $525,000. The next step in the process is to create the documents for bidding purposes, and tonight this is the first step in that process. The department's available for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for Joe? All right, seeing none, the bill will be on the council's agenda for its next meeting. Moving next into resolutions, we have two. The first is Resolution 2021-16, and it concerns all wards. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 2021-16? Made by Councilmember Dodwell, second by Councilmember Flasher. Ms. Eldridge, please read the resolution.
Resolution 2021-16, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, amending Resolution number 2020-16 and providing for the composition of the Community Outreach Task Force.
Okay, thank you. So the impetus for this resolution is me. As you may recall, when this task force was appointed, the composition of it was set at being quite large. My recollection is 24. Is that right? 16 or 19? Okay, big number. And in consultation with Councilmember Flasher, who leads that group, it's nearing an end, and we've had a couple of resignations from it that really, again, in consultation with him, haven't affected the dynamics and decision-making of the task force. And lastly, under the charters, once a vacancy becomes open, I have 30 days to appoint. And so it seemed to make more sense, given where the task force is in the charter provisions and everything, to keep us all straight, that we simply move at this point to change the composition down lower so that there's no need to make the appointments to replace people since it's nearing the end. So that's the logic. Councilor Flasher, did you want to say anything further relative to that?
No, that's exactly right. It seemed kind of pointless to add somebody in the final stages of the whole process. So I thought it made more sense to just let it kind of run its course there.
Yep. Thank you. Any questions for Councilor Flasher or me? All right, seeing none, all in favor of the motion to adopt resolution 2021.
Lauren's got her hand up.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Edens, my apology.
That's okay. I was just wondering, on average, how many people have kind of been attending? Just if we ever do anything like this in the future, can you just give me an idea of how well it didn't work? So on the last several meetings, about how many have attended?
Councilor Flasher, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I'd say on average about 2/3 of the committee have been attending regularly.
Okay, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councilor Edens, we can discuss this later, but your background for someone who's colorblind mixes horribly with your yellow, the hand up that I think is yellow because I can't, I'm not seeing it. So if you're wondering why I'm missing calling on you, it's because it's blending into your background there. Okay, so all in favor of the motion to adopt resolution 2021-16, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Not that your background there isn't very nice, just wanted to let you know that. Okay, finally moving to resolution 2021-17. It's before the council and it concerns Ward 1. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 2021-17 made by Councilmember Bros, seconded by Councilmember Clark? Ms. Eldridge, please read the resolution.
Resolution 2021-17, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Wildwood, Missouri, approving the postponement of the Manchester Road Shared Use Path project, including the suspension of easement acquisition and rescission of the Federal Transportation Alternatives Funding Program agreement.
Thank you. And so you may recall, council members, that this came as a result of action by you as a body relative to this, and this is the action needed to affect that decision formally. So are there any questions on that? All right, seeing none, all in favor of resolution 2021-17, please say aye.
Aye.
Sorry, the motion to adopt it, say aye. All right, any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. That takes us to the consent agenda. We have two things, the expenditures and 3 reappointments. Lindsay Marion to ARB, Architectural Review Board from Ward 8, Deborah Quarternick on the HPC from Ward 6, and Jim Hubris, who's with us this evening. Welcome, Jim, from Ward 8, also to HPC. If you have any questions on any of those reappointments, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, a motion would be in order to approve all the appointments and the expenditures as presented on the consent agenda. To approve the consent agenda as presented, made by Councilmember Ottenberg, seconded by Councilmember McCutcheon. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion on the motion to approve the consent agenda items as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that takes us to miscellaneous. Anything anyone would like to mention? Councilor Bartoni?
So not this past Saturday, the Saturday before, when that really nasty wicked storm came rumbling through, we actually had a tree on Sprecher. I don't know if you were aware of this, Katie, or not, but it actually blocked the road. It fell, and one of our neighbors called and told me about it. And of course, you're calling everybody you can, but I did finally get a hold of Steve, and Steve got a hold of a bunch of staff. I did get a hold of the police, and I want to say, Captain, thank you to you and your staff for the quick response. Steve, thank you for your quick response, because my wife left the house 25 minutes later and the tree was out of the road. So thank you for everybody who was responsible for getting that tree moved.
Thank you for mentioning that. Anything else? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting of the council. Made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Hopper. Non-debatable motion. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We are adjourned. Thank you and have a great rest of the week.